Welcome back, Night Dwellers. I'm your host, Mothy, and tonight we're stepping into the dark with Hounded by Shadows. Arabella didn't expect much from a simple yard sale, but a strange painting of a black hound, its amber eyes staring out of the frame, calls to her in ways she can't explain. What begins as a decoration soon grows darker as the shadows around her shift and secrets hidden in the painting start to bleed into her life. So, settle in for part one of Hounded by Shadows, because tonight's tale will follow you long after the lights are out. Arabella tightened her scarf against the brisk autumn breeze, which seemed to whisper throughout the cul-de-sac as she wandered the weekend yard sale. She needed something for the walls of her new apartment, something to break up the bleak, empty expanse of white. It was a tiny, cold place compared to the one she had shared with Lux, her ex-boyfriend. And now the silence pressed down on her at night, heavy and suffocating. The memory of her mother's words still lingered in her mind, telling her she could always come back home. But Arabella refused to admit defeat. At 26, moving back home would mean failure. Halfway down the lane, her gaze landed on an object that stopped her mid-step. It was a framed photograph, or so it seemed, but unlike any photograph she had ever seen. The frame was rough wood, darkened with age and splintered at the edges, as though time itself had carved into it. The image showed a lone black hound sitting in a field, its fur thick and clumped as if it were wet. The dusk light had painted the scene in a dim, washed-out palette, deepening shadows to ink-black pools. The hound's eyes, a wary amber, stared out with hollow intensity. She felt the air thick around her, the scent of damp earth filling her senses. Arabella felt an inexplicable pull. The hound's gaze seemed to reach into her, its loneliness a dark mirror of her own. She lifted the frame with gentle hands, feeling the cool roughness of the wood scrape against her fingertips. She had hardly noticed the old woman sitting in the rocking chair nearby, watching her with unnerving stillness. Arabella was only jolted from her trance by a sudden low growl. A small, wiry dog appeared from behind the woman's legs, snapping at the painting with sharp, bared teeth. She stumbled, clutching the frame to her chest as if shielding it from the dog's wrath. "Oh, don't mind him," the woman said, reeling the dog back. "He's always hated that painting. Jealous, maybe." She chuckled, but it wasn't a warm sound. It seemed to scratch at the air, leaving it colder. Arabella managed a weak laugh, though her pulse raced. The woman's gaze was steady, piercing, like she could see through Arabella's skin straight into her thoughts. With stiff fingers, Arabella fished out a few bills and handed them over, feeling an odd weight settle over her as she walked away with the frame cradled in her arms. Back at her apartment, Arabella hung the painting in the living room. It seemed to consume the wall, the dark frame swallowing the pale light. She kept glancing at it, her eyes drawn back as though tethered. Her apartment, already chilly, seemed colder that night, the silence pressing in tighter. The hound's gaze seemed to shift with her, watching, almost waiting. Over the next few days, the picture became her nightly companion. She found herself lingering by it before bed, her eyes tracing each detail, the thick matted fur, the way the hound sat, as though burdened by something only it could sense. Each time she looked, it seemed subtly different, darker somehow, as if the shadows themselves were thickening around it. Her new job was draining enough without the added distraction of her sleepless nights. Her manager, Miss Cindy, scrutinized her every move, her every missed deadline. Arabella's mind was becoming a fog, her focus slipping through her fingers like sand. She would lie in bed each night on the edge of sleep, her mind buzzing with a vague sense of dread she couldn't shake. And each morning she woke with a headache, a heavy feeling in her chest, her dreams slipping from her memory as if wiped away by a force stronger than she was. Strange things began happening. Coarse black hairs appeared on her bedspread, her couch, even on her clothes. She'd find them in small clumps, twisted, matted, as though they had been there for years, rounded into the fibers of her belongings. One evening, she even found them in her soup, tangled and black against the broth, the sharp smell of damp fur turning her stomach. She scrubbed her hands again and again, but the scent clung to her skin, lingering long after the soap had faded. The air in her apartment felt different, denser and heavier. Sometimes she thought she smelled smoke, faint and far away, just on the edge of her senses. It was absurd, she told herself, but as the days wore on, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was watching her, waiting. The painting seemed to grow darker, the shadows deepening, the hound's amber eyes sharper, more aware. That concludes today's episode. Join us next week for another spine-tingling tale here on Simple Dark Stories. If you enjoyed this and would like to help out, please give us 5 stars and let us know what haunts your dreams. Until next time, bye-bye.